My name is Calliope. I am 29 years old. For 7 years, my boss, Sterling Thorne, took credit for every brilliant idea I ever had. He called me his little shadow, a patronizing nickname that disguised the fact that my algorithms were the only reason his venture capital firm hadn't filed for bankruptcy in 2019. For 29 years, my parents looked at my older sister, Vesper, as if she had hung the moon, while treating me like an administrative error they were forced to house. And for 3 years, my fiancé, Kylan, held me in the dark when I had panic attacks, kissing my forehead and promising me that I was safe, that I was finally seen. I believed them all. I played the quiet, compliant role they carved out for me. But on a rainy Tuesday in November, Sterling's executive assistant called in sick, and he sent me across the city to deliver an urgent dossier to a VIP client at the Street Regis Hotel. I rode the elevator to the penthouse level, exhausted, rain-soaked, carrying a manila folder that I thought contained routine non-disclosure agreements. I knocked on the heavy oak door of Suite 402. The door opened, and I froze. Because the man opening the door wasn't a VIP client. It was Kalen, my fiancé, wearing a plush hotel bathrobe, and sitting on the velvet sofa behind him, holding a crystal flute of champagne, was my sister, Vesper. Standing by the D.O., Lisper, window, toasting them both, was my boss, Sterling. In that single, shattering moment, I didn't just discover an affair. I discovered a coordinated, multi-million-dollar conspiracy to steal my life's work, drain my accounts, and institutionalize me. They thought I was fragile. They thought I was slow to catch on. What they didn't know was that my late mentor, the founder of the firm, had seen this coming, and he had left me a digital kill switch that was about to flip their entire empire into ashes. Before I go any further, if you have ever been the person in the background, the one who does all the work while someone else takes the applause, the one who is, I told you are too sensitive when your intuition is screaming that something is wrong, take a moment to like and subscribe. Only do it if this story truly resonates with you. And drop your location and local time in the comments below. I want to know where you are sitting right now as you listen to this. Now, let me take you back to the beginning, to a sprawling, high-ceilinged house in the suburbs of Seattle, and the exact moment I learned that love in my family was a transactional currency I could never afford. My parents, Orion and Lyra, were people who believed that aesthetics equaled morality. My father was a corporate litigator who treated every conversation like a cross-examination. My mother was a former gallery curator who curated her family with the same ruthless eye for flaws. There were 2 daughters in our Pelson house, but there was only one masterpiece. Vesper was 2 years older than me. She was radiant, charismatic, and effortlessly fluent in the language of social manipulation. She played the harp, she captained the debate team, she walked into rooms and the air seemed to rearrange itself to suit her breathing. I, on the other hand, was diagnosed with autism at age 8. I didn't make eye contact the right way. I couldn't tolerate the texture of velvet or the sound of chewing. I didn't speak in charming anecdotes. I spoke in data, in patterns, in hyperfixations that bored my parents to tears. There is a distinct kind of pain in being the daughter who makes her parents sigh. I remember my 12th birthday. I had spent 6 months teaching myself Python so I could build a custom home automation program for my father. I thought if I could make his life easier, if I could show him the utility of my brain, he would look at me the way he looked at Vesper. When I presented it to him at the dinner table, a clunky laptop pushed across the mahogany surface, he barely glanced at the screen. "That's nice, Calliope," he said, returning to his steak. "But please put the screen away at the table." Vesper was just telling us about her audition for the lead in the spring musical. I closed the laptop. I watched Vesper smile, a smile that was just a little too sharp at the corners, and I learned to adapt. I stopped trying to be seen. I folded myself into the background. I realized that my ability to see patterns, to process massive amounts of information, was a superpower that isolated me. So, I hid it. I buried myself in mathematics, in predictive modeling, in the quiet, absolute truth of numbers. When I was 22, I graduated from MIT with a master's in data architecture. My parents didn't fly out for the ceremony. My mother texted me, that Vesper had just landed a massive PR account in Los Angeles and they were throwing her a celebratory dinner that weekend. "We're so proud of both our girls," she wrote. "I spent graduation night eating takeout on the floor of my dorm room staring at my degree. I moved back to the West Coast and took a job as a junior data analyst at Thorn Ascendant, an elite venture capital firm in Seattle. The starting salary was $55,000. It was insultingly low for my credentials, but I didn't know how to negotiate. I didn't know how to advocate for myself. That was where I met Sterling Thorn. Sterling was the kind of man who wore bespoke suits and possessed a smile that felt like a spotlight. He was 38, a second-generation CEO who had inherited the firm from his uncle. Sterling wasn't a genius, but he had a predatory instinct for identifying people who were. Within my first month, he noticed me. He noticed that I stayed until 10 p.m. He noticed that the predictive models I built for tech startups were outperforming the senior analysts' models by a margin of 40%. He called me into his glass-walled office, poured me a cup of expensive espresso, and looked at me with an intensity that made my neurodivergent brain buzz with anxiety and desperate gratitude. "You're not like the others, Calliope," he told me, leaning across his massive oak desk. "They look at the surface. You see the bones of the market. You see the architecture." For a girl who had spent her entire life being told her brain was wrong, those words were intoxicating. Sterling promoted me to his special projects director. It came with a modest bump in pay, $70,000, and an office with no profit windows right next to his. My job was to build a proprietary algorithmic model that could predict market fluctuations in the renewable energy sector. I spent 3 years building it. I coded until my fingers bled. I slept under my desk. I called the algorithm the Loom. When the Loom successfully predicted the collapse of a major solar competitor, saving the firm $40 million, Sterling took the stage at an industry conference in San Francisco. I watched from the back of the auditorium, wearing a cheap blazer, as Sterling accepted a standing ovation for his revolutionary new predictive model. He didn't mention my name once. When I asked him about it later, he smiled gently and patted my shoulder. "Calliope, the board doesn't understand the technical jargon. They need a face. You're the genius behind the curtain. We're a team. You wouldn't want the stress of the spotlight anyway, would you? With your social anxieties?" He weaponized my autism against me, dressing it up as protection. And I let him. Because I believed I needed him. And then I met Kylan. Kalen was an acquisitions lawyer at a rival firm. We met in the lobby of my building during a fire drill. He was tall, with soft brown eyes and a laugh that seemed to disarm every defense I had spent 25 years building. Unlike my father, Kalen asked me questions about my code. Unlike Sterling, Kalen didn't interrupt me when I spoke. On our third date, I had a sensory overload panic attack in a crowded restaurant. The clinking silverware, the overlapping conversations, the smell of truffles, it all crashed down on me. I froze, unable to breathe, tears streaming down my face. I expected Kalen to be embarrassed. I expected him to call an end Uber and never speak to me again. Instead, he quietly paid the bill, wrapped his coat around my shoulders, and guided me to his car. We sat in the quiet dark of his Honda for 2 hours. He didn't ask me to explain. He just held my hand. "You never have to hide with me, Calliope," he whispered, pressing a kiss to my temple. "I see you, the real you, and she is spectacular." I fell in love with a velocity that terrified me. Kalen became my sanctuary. When my parents forgot my 27th birthday, Kalen baked me a cake from scratch. When Vesper called me to complain about her glamorous life subtly, mocking my boring desk job, Kalen would hold my hand under the table and text me jokes. When Kalen proposed in the quiet of my small apartment with a simple vintage sapphire ring, I wept. I finally had a family. I finally had someone who chose me, or so I thought. I need you to understand how deeply entrenched this illusion was. I was 29. I was engaged to a man I thought was my soulmate. I was the secret architect of a venture capital firm that was currently valued at $800 million, largely because of my algorithm. I thought my life was finally stabilizing. But there was a silent variable in my equation. a man named Silas Blackwood. Silas was Sterling's uncle, the original founder of Thorn Ascendant. He was 75, technically retired, but he still kept a dusty office on the top floor. Silas was a curmudgeon, a brilliant mathematician who had zero tolerance for corporate posturing. We had bonded during my second year at the firm over a Pro Stirring and the Pro DI. Shared obsession with prime numbers and Earl Grey tea. Silas saw right through Sterling. My nephew is a parasite, Calliope Silas told me once, staring out the window at the Seattle skyline. He has the soul of Lashan, a middle manager and the ego of an emperor. He is going to try to consume you. Sterling takes care of me, I had argued, defensive. Silas just shook his head, his pale eyes entirely devoid of pity. He has built a cage for you out of your own insecurities, but I won't let him lock the door. I didn't understand what he meant until the reading of his will. Silas died of a sudden stroke 6 months before the rainy Tuesday in November. I attended his funeral. Sterling gave a tearful eulogy. I stood in the back, grieving the only mentor I ever had. A week later, Silas's personal attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Miss Albright, handed me a sealed envelope. Inside was a flash drive and a handwritten note. Calliope, the loom belongs to you. I made sure of it. Do not open the drive until you are ready to burn the house down. I put the flash drive in my safety deposit box. I didn't want to burn the house down. I just wanted to survive. I wanted to marry Kaylin, do my work, and live quietly. But the universe and my family had other plans. It started subtly. Kaylin began taking phone calls in the other room. He changed the passcode on his phone. When I asked him about it, he gaslit me with the precision of a surgeon. Callie, your anxiety is acting up again. You know how. You get paranoid when you're stressed. I'm just dealing with a massive merger at work. You need to trust me. I felt guilty for questioning him. I doubled down on my therapy, convinced my neurodivergence was making me suspicious and toxic. At the same time, Vesper moved back to Seattle. She had abruptly quit her PR job. In LA, my parents bought her a luxury condo downtown to help her transition. Suddenly, Vesper was always around. She started showing up at my apartment to hang out, which usually consisted of her drinking my wine and asking Kaylin questions about corporate law while I cooked dinner. I noticed the way they looked at each other, a lingering glance here, a shared laugh there. But whenever the alarm bells rang in my head, I forced them silent. You are misreading social cues again, I told myself. You always get this wrong. They are just getting along. And then came the work crisis. Sterling informed me that Thorn Ascendant was preparing for an acquisition. A massive tech conglomerate wanted to buy the firm for $1.2 billion, primarily to acquire the loom. This is our moment, Callie, Sterling told me, pacing his office. We are going to be legions. What is my equity stake in the buyout? I asked quietly. Sterling stopped pacing. He looked at me as if I had just spoken in tongues. Callie, you're an employee. You have a generous salary. I'm going to give you a $100,000 bonus when this closes. That's life-changing money. I had built $1 billion asset, and he was offering me a fraction of a percent. I wrote the architecture, I said, my voice shaking. Sterling's face hardened. The charismatic mask slipped, revealing the cold, Reption calculation underneath. You wrote code on company time, using company servers. You don't own anything, Calliope. You are a tool I utilized. Don't ruin this with greed. It's unflattering, especially for someone with your limitation. I went home that night and cried in Kaylin's arms. I told him everything. I told him about the loom, about the buyout, about Sterling's cruelty. Kaylin stroked my hair. It's okay, Callie. You don't need them. You have me. Maybe it's time you quit. Let him have it. It's too stressful for you anyway. I agreed. I decided I would resign on Wednesday. But Tuesday happened first. It was 8:30 p.m. The rain was lashing against the glass of the Thorn Ascendant building. I was packing up my desk, putting my personal notebooks into a barred-in cardboard box. Sterling's door opened. He looked frantic. Calliope, thank God you're still here. I was just leaving. My assistant has the flu. I have a courier package that has to be delivered to the Street Regis Penthouse Suite 402 tonight. It's the final due diligence hard. Copies for the buyout. The client is flying to Tokyo at midnight. They need 1T's plies. Physical signatures. Call a courier service, I said, my voice flat. They're quoting a 2-hour delay because of the storm. Callie, please. If this deal falls through, the firm is bankrupt. I'll double your bonus. Just drop it. Off. He handed me a thick, sealed manila envelope. I looked at his desperate face. Even after everything, the habit of compliance was hard to break. I took the Reese-No stash envelope. I drove through the blinding rain to the Street Regis. The lobby was a symphony of marble and gold, humming with wealthy patrons. I rode the elevator to the 4th floor, the penthouse level. The hallway was silent, lined with plush carpet that absorbed the sound of my wet shoes. I found suite 402. I raised my knuckle and knocked twice. I expected an older Japanese businessman. I expected a corporate lawyer in a wrinkled suit. I heard footsteps. The lock clicked. The heavy door swung inward. And there was Kalen. He was wearing a white hotel bathrobe. His hair was damp, curled at the ends, the same way it got when he stepped out of the shower. He had a glass of whiskey in his hand. He looked at me. I looked at him. The air in my lungs turned to solid ice. For a fraction of a second, my brain tried to protect me. It desperately ran. Through 1,000 innocent permutations, Kalen is here finalizing the merger. Kalen is representing the buyer. Kalen spilled coffee on his suit and the process. Hotel provided a robe. It is terrifying how the human mind will build a fortress of delusion just to stave off the crushing weight of reality. But then Kalen's eyes shifted. The warm, gentle gaze that had anchored me through countless panic attacks vanished, replaced by a flat, clinical emptiness. He didn't look surprised. He didn't look guilty. He looked mildly inconvenienced. "You're 30 minutes early, Calliope," he said. His voice was smooth, completely devoid of the panic a cheating fiancé should possess. "Who is at the door, darling?" a voice called from inside the suite. It was a voice I had heard every day of my childhood, a voice that had mocked my clothes, stolen my achievements, and charmed my parents into absolute submission. I pushed past Kalen. I didn't think. My body simply moved on a primal axis of survival and horror. The penthouse suite was an expanse of cream leather, polished mahogany, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the rain-slicked city. And there they were, the architects of my destruction. Vesper was lounging on a low velvet sofa, wearing a silk slip dress that perfectly matched the amber liquid in her crystal glass. Her bare legs were draped casually over the cushions. She looked like a predator resting after a successful hunt. Standing by the wet bar, pouring a fresh glass of Dom Perignon, was Sterling. He was still wearing his bespoke suit, but he had removed the tie. He looked entirely in his element. 3 people. My fiancé, my sister, my boss. I stood in the center of the Persian rug, dripping rainwater onto the immaculate fibers. The manila envelope was clutched so tightly in my hands that the thick paper was buckling. The sensory input of the room began to swarm me the smell of Sterling's expensive sandalwood cologne, the sharp citrus of Vesper's perfume, the hum of the climate control system, the clinking of ice against crystal. My chest tightened. The familiar, terrifying pressure of an incoming panic attack squeezed my lungs. They were waiting for it. I could see it in their eyes. "What is this?" I whispered. The words tasted like ash. Sterling took a slow sip of his champagne. He exchanged a look with Kalen, who had closed the suite door and was now leaning against the wall, arms crossed, over the plush white fabric of his bathrobe. "It's a transition plan, Calliope," Sterling said, his tone as casual as if he were discussing the weather. "I told you we needed physical signatures for the Facherseer buyout. I just didn't tell you whose signatures we needed." "You sent me here," I said, my brain struggling to process the geometry of the betrayal. "You sent me here on purpose. Your assistant wasn't sick." "Oh, she's perfectly healthy," Vesper chimed in, swirling her glass. She offered me a smile that was so sharply cruel it practically drew blood. "But we needed all the principal players in one room to execute the final documents. And, frankly, little sister, we were tired of pretending." I looked at Kalen, my sanctuary, the man who had kissed my forehead and told me my neurodivergence was a gift. "Kalen," I choked out, my voice breaking. "Please, tell me this is a nightmare." Kalen sighed, a heavy, performative sound of exhaustion. He walked over to the Algiz sofa and sat down next to Vesper. He didn't just sit next to her, he placed his hand on her bare thigh. The intimacy of the gesture was so casual, so deeply established, that it felt like a physical blow to my sternum. "It's not a nightmare, Callie. It's just business," Kalen said gently, the same gentle tone he used when I was crying from sensory overload. It made my stomach violently turn. "You have to admit, you were becoming a liability. The board for the acquisition didn't want a rogue, unstable coder holding the keys to a Farian Andrade billion-dollar algorithm. They needed clean title. They needed security." I looked down at the manila envelope in my hands. The heavy, sealed package Sterling had claimed was due diligence paperwork. "Open it, Calliope," Sterling commanded softly. My fingers were trembling so violently I could barely break the seal. I tore the plan, flap open, and pulled out a stack of legal documents. I expected to see non-disclosure agreements. I expected to see patent transfers forcing me to surrender my rights to the loom. I was wrong. It was so much worse. The first document was a psychiatric evaluation. It detailed a history of severe unmanageable autism spectrum meltdowns, profound paranoia, and an aptitude-less inability to care for myself. It was signed by a private psychiatrist I had never met. The second document was a comprehensive medical power of attorney and a petition for involuntary conservatorship. The designated conservator was Kalen. The alternate conservator was Vesper. "You're going to commit me," I breathed, the horror paralyzing my vocal cords. "Commit is such an ugly word," Vesper said, taking a delicate sip of her drink. "We are going to secure you the residential care you so desperately need. Mom and Dad have already signed the affidavits agreeing with our assessment. They've always known you were broken, Callie. We're just finalizing the paperwork." My own parents had signed affidavits declaring me mentally incompetent. The room spun. The floor felt as though it were dropping out from beneath my feet. "The acquisition requires complete transfer of the loom's intellectual property," Sterling explained, walking slowly toward me. "As the creator, you have latent legal rights that could tie up the merger in litigation for years. But if you are deemed mentally unfit, your appointed conservator can sign those rights away on your behalf. For a very reasonable settlement, of course." "A settlement that Kalen controls," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "We all get what we want," Kalen said smoothly. "Sterling gets the billion-dollar buyout. Vesper gets the seed capital to launch her own global PR firm, and I get a 10% equity share of the merged conglomerate, plus control of your settlement." I stared at the man I had promised to marry. I looked at the ring on my left hand, the vintage sapphire that he had placed there with promises of forever. "Was any of it real?" I asked him. "Did you ever love me?" Kalen actually laughed. It was a short, breathy chuckle that held no humor. "Callie, you are a data architect. You understand variables. You were an assignment. Sterling identified the legal hurdle of your IP rights 2 years ago. I was brought in to establish a relationship, gain your trust, and position myself as your proxy. It was incredibly easy. You were so desperate for validation, so isolated by your own weirdness, that all I had to do was tolerate your meltdowns, and you handed me the keys to your life." He called my vulnerability weirdness. He called my absolute, terrifying love for him an assignment. "You used my autism against me," I said. "It was the perfect weapon," Vesper said, her eyes gleaming with dark triumph. "No one questions it. You've always been the strange one, the freak who couldn't look people in the eye, the girl who cried over loud noises. When Kalen tells the judge that the stress of the acquisition triggered a total psychotic break, it will perfectly align with everything our parents have ever said about you. It is a flawless narrative." Sterling stopped a few feet away from me. "We brought you here tonight because the narrative requires an inciting incident. You are going to sign the IP. Transfer right now, Calliope. If you refuse, Kalen will call the paramedics. He will tell them you burst into our hotel room in a state of violent paranoia. Given your medical history, which we have thoroughly documented, they will place you on a mandatory 72-hour psychiatric hold. By the time you get out, the conservatorship will be active, and Kalen will sign the papers for you. Either way, you lose the loom. Either way, you disappear." They had built a trap with no exits. They had weaponized my family, my health, and my heart. They were standing there, waiting for me to collapse. They wanted the meltdown, They needed me to scream, to cry, to tear at my hair the way I did. When the world became too loud, they needed the hysterical, unstable woman they had written into their legal fiction. The hum of the room grew deafening. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the probably Arnie's R's corner. The sound of Kaylin's breathing. The sharp, suffocating scent of champagne. The pressure in my skull was immense, a physical weight pushing me toward the edge of the cliff. I am going to break, I thought. I am going to fall to the floor, and they are going to win. But then, an image flashed in my mind. Silas Blackwood, my mentor, sitting in his dusty office, holding a cup of Earl Grey tea, looking out at the rain. He has built a cage for you out of your own insecurities, Silas had said. But I won't let him lock the door. Do not open the drive until you are ready to burn the house down. The panic suddenly stopped. It didn't fade. It froze. My neurodivergent brain, the brain they had mocked, the brain they had called broken, the brain that could process millions of data, points a second snapped into absolute, terrifying clarity. The sensory overload didn't crush me. It sharpened me. I stopped seeing three monsters in a hotel room. I started seeing a system. I saw the architecture of their conspiracy, and I saw the fatal flaw in their code. They thought I was a victim. They forgot I was an engineer. I slowly lowered the manila envelope. My hands stopped shaking. The tears that had been prickling at the corners of my eyes evaporated, leaving behind a cold, dry focus that I had previously only reserved for my algorithms. I looked at Sterling. I looked at Vesper. I looked at Kaylin. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I calmly took off my engagement ring. The vintage sapphire slipped over my slipped knuckle. I walked over to the glass coffee table and placed it down. The metal made a soft clink against the glass. I won't sign, I said. My voice was perfectly level. Sterling frowned, his arrogant smile faltering for a fraction of a second. This wasn't the script. I was supposed to be weeping. Then Kaylin makes the call, Sterling threatened. Make it, I challenged, staring directly into Kaylin's eyes. I didn't look away. I held his gaze with a predatory stillness that made him shift uncomfortably on the sofa. Call the paramedics. Tell them I'm having a psychotic break. But ask yourself this, Kaylin. If I am currently having a blank psychotic break, why is my heart rate completely steady? Why am I speaking in a measured cadence? When the paramedics arrive and find a perfectly calm, articulate woman who is requesting a blood test to prove she has not been drugged, what will your narrative look like? Vesper sat up, her brow furrowing. You're bluffing. You're barely holding it together. I am the architect of a billion-dollar predictive model, Vesper, I said, turning my gaze to her. I process complex systems for a living. You are currently operating under the assumption that you hold all the variables. You do? Not. I turned my back on them and walked toward the door. Calliope! Sterling barked, his voice cracking like a whip. If you walk out that door, you are declaring war. You have no money. You have no family. You have no allies. You cannot fight us. We will crush you. I paused with my hand on the heavy brass doorknob. I didn't look back at them. I didn't need to. I had already memorized the exact layout of their arrogance. You shouldn't have taught me how to read the bones of the market, Sterling, I said quietly to the door, because now I know how to break them. I opened the door, stepped out into the quiet, carpeted hallway and let the Prussian heavy oak click shut behind me. The moment the door latched, my knees gave out. I hit the hallway wall, sliding down the expensive wallpaper until I was sitting on the floor. My heart rate, which I had suppressed through sheer, unnatural willpower, exploded in my chest. My lungs gasped for air. The betrayal ripped through me in jagged, agonizing waves. Kaylin's hand on Vesper's leg. My parents signing the affidavits. The entire last 3 years of my life had been a meticulously engineered lie. I sat on the floor of the St. Regis hallway and wept. I wept for the girl who had believed she was finally loved. I wept for the future I thought I had. I let the sensory overload wash over me, let the pain shatter every illusion I had been clinging to. I gave myself exactly 5 minutes to mourn the death of Calliope the victim. Then, I stood up. I walked to the elevator. I pressed the button for the lobby. By the time the Lam Ennius Lavely faced calmless, doors opened on the ground floor, my tears were dry, my posture was straight. The algorithm of my revenge was already compiling in my mind. I walked out into the Seattle rain, letting the cold water hit my face. I didn't have a coat. I didn't have my ring. But I had something much more dangerous. I had Silas Blackwood's flash drive. I went straight to my bank. It was an automated 2-4-hour secure vault downtown. I used my keycard, bypassed the sleepy security guard, and accessed my safety deposit box. Inside was my passport, a few heirloom pieces of jewelry from my grandmother, and the matte black flash drive Silas had left me. I went back to my apartment, the apartment Kaylin and I had shared. His shoes were by the door. His coffee mug was in the sink. The ghost of his fake love coated every surface of the room. I felt a surge of nausea, but I pushed it down. There was no time for grief. The conservatorship machinery was already moving. I had to strike before Kaylin could file the paperwork with the Seattle courts in the morning. I sat down at my custom-built desktop rig. 3 monitors hummed to life, casting a harsh blue glow across my face. I plugged Silas's flash drive into the port. A password prompt appeared on the screen. Enter encryption key. I paused. Silas hadn't left a password in his note. He had only left a warning. Do not open the drive until you are ready to burn the house down. I closed my eyes and thought of Silas. Our conversations about prime numbers. The Earl Grey tea. The way he looked at Sterling with absolute disgust. Silas wouldn't use a random string of text. He would use a pattern, a mathematical constant that meant something. I typed the first 10 digits of Euler's number. Incorrect. I typed the date of the firm's founding. Incorrect. I stopped. I looked at the prompt. Silas had said Sterling built a cage for me, but he wouldn't let him lock the door. The key to the cage wasn't a number. It was an identity. I slowly typed THEARCHITECT. The prompt blinked green. The drive unlocked. A single folder appeared on my desktop. The title was simply Pandora. I opened the folder. My eyes scanned the documents, the thousands of lines of code, the encrypted offshore bank records, the hidden legal charters. As my brain processed the massive influx of data, a cold, terrifying smile spread across my face in the dark room. Silas hadn't just left me the legal ownership rights to the loom. He had left me the digital scaffolding of Thorn Ascendant's entire financial structure. He had left me the encrypted ledgers showing every illegal bribe Sterling had paid to secure venture capital. He had left me the unredacted emails proving Kaylin's law firm was engaged in corporate espionage. But the masterpiece, the absolute genius of Silas Blackwood, was a secondary algorithm hidden within the drive. A piece of malware designed to interface perfectly with the loom. If I executed the code, it wouldn't just assert my ownership. It would invert the loom's predictive models. It would take the billion-dollar algorithm that Sterling was trying to sell to the tech conglomerate and turn it into a financial suicide pact. Any company that integrated the tainted code into their trading platforms would instantly trigger catastrophic automated short sells across their own portfolios. It was a poison pill of unprecedented magnitude. If Sterling sold them the loom, he would be selling them a digital bomb. And, when it detonated, the liability would fall entirely on Sterling Thorn. He wouldn't just go bankrupt. He would face decades in federal prison for corporate fraud. But Silas had left one final document in the folder, a video file. I clicked play. Silas appeared on the screen, sitting in his office, looking frail but fiercely lucid. "Hello, Calliope," the recording rasped. "If you are watching this, my nephew has finally shown his true colors, and you have survived the shock. I knew he was planning to steal your work. I knew he had hired that snake of a lawyer to manipulate you. I tried to warn you, but you needed to see the blade yourself." Silas coughed, taking a sip of his tea. "The drive contains everything you need to destroy them. But you must understand the rules of engagement. You cannot fight Sterling in a courtroom. He has the judges, the money, and the narrative. If you fight him publicly, they will use your neurodivergence to paint you as a pariah, disgruntled, unstable employee. You must fight him in the architecture. You must let him think he has won. You must let him steal the loom." I leaned closer to the monitor. Let him steal it? The malware on this drive, Silas continued, is dormant. It requires physical insertion into the mainframe of Thorn Ascendant's primary server. Once it is uploaded, it will bind itself to the loom. You will sign whatever paperwork they put in front of you. You will smile, you will walk away. And when Sterling finalizes the acquisition and hands the keys to the conglomerate, the poison will activate. The screen went black. I sat back in my chair. The elegance of the plan was breathtaking. I didn't have to prove my sanity to a judge. I didn't have to beg my parents to love me. I didn't have to fight Kaylin's conservatorship. I just had to surrender. I had to play the part of the broken, defeated girl. They all believed I was, while secretly planting the explosives under their braces. Empire. It was currently 11:45 p.m. The primary server for Thorn Ascendant was located in the sub-basement of the office building. I still had my elite-level security clearance, but Sterling would revoke it the moment the banks opened at 8 a.m. I had exactly 8 hours to break into my own company, infect my own masterpiece, and orchestrate the downfall of everyone who had ever touched my Dina's life. I moved with the precision of a metronome. There was no room for panic, no space for the emotional wreckage Kaylin had left behind. I packed a small duffel bag with 3 days' worth of clothes, my passport, and the encrypted flash drive. I wiped my custom-built desktop, running a military-grade scrubbing protocol that turned my hard drives to digital dust. I left Kaylin's spare keys on the kitchen counter next to a sticky note that simply read, "I concede." It was a brilliant piece of theater. It was exactly what they expected from a fragile, easily overwhelmed woman who had just realized she was outmatched. Let them think I had run away to hide. Let them think they had won without a fight. At 1:15 a.m., I parked my car 2 blocks away from the Thorn Ascendant building. The rain was still coming down in sheets, hiding my approach. I pulled the hood of my dark raincoat over my head and walked to the service entrance in the Tuanian Daco alleyway. I swiped my keycard. The light blinked green. The heavy steel door clicked open. I was in. The building was a tomb of glass and silence. I bypassed the elevators they close, required a secondary biometric scan that logged entry times, and took the /n concrete stairwell down to sub-basement B. My heart hammered against my ribs. A staccato rhythm of fear and adrenaline. I had spent 3 years building the Lox's wealth of this firm. Tonight I was tearing it down. The server room was protected by a retinal scanner and a numeric keypad. I stood in front of the heavy reinforced door, my breath fogging the cold air. I placed my eye against the scanner. Access granted. Director Calliope Vance. The door unsealed with a hiss of pressurized air. I stepped inside the cavernous room, surrounded by the rhythmic humming and flashing blue lights of the server racks. This was the brain of Thorn Ascendant. This was where the loom lived, constantly digesting terabytes of market data, predicting the future for a man who had tried to steal mine. I found the primary terminal. I plugged Silas's flash drive into the port. The command prompt appeared on the small monitor. I didn't hesitate. I executed. The Pandora file. The screen flooded with lines of code, scrolling faster than the human eye could. Read. I watched as the malware unpacked itself. A digital parasite designed to mimic the exact structural signature of my algorithm. It was beautiful in its lethality. It wrapped itself around the loom's core architecture, hiding in the blind spots, perfectly disguised as routine subroutines. It took 7 minutes. 7 minutes to undo 3 years of my life. Upload complete. Dormancy protocol engaged. I pulled the flash drive from the port. The server hummed, entirely unaware that it had just been weaponized. I exited the building the way I came, disappearing back into the rainy Seattle night. I didn't go back to my apartment. I drove to a cheap motel near the Bystay airport, paid for 3 nights in cash, and locked the door behind me. I sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, staring at the peeling wallpaper. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for them to walk into it. The following morning at 9 a.m., my burner phone rang. It was Kaylin. I let it ring 3 times, controlling my breathing, forcing my voice to sound small, brittle, and terrified. I picked up. "Hello?" I whispered. "Callie, where are you?" Kaylin's voice was sharp, edged with a frantic energy. He had found the sticky note. He had found the wiped computers. "I'm at a motel," I said, my voice trembling perfectly. I can't. I can't do this, Kalen. I can't fight you and Sterling. The noise in my head is too loud." I heard him exhale, a long sigh of relief. He thought he had me. He thought the pressure had broken me, just as they had planned. "Callie, listen to me," he said, adopting that sickeningly gentle tone again. "Nobody wants to fight. We just want what's best for you. Sterling is willing to lock. Be generous. If you sign the IP transfer today, we won't file the conservatorship. You can walk away with the $100,000 bonus. You can disappear, go somewhere quiet like you always wanted." It was a lie, of course. The moment I signed, they would file the paperwork anyway to ensure I could never contest the signature later. But I needed them to believe I was desperate enough to take the deal. "If I sign it, you promise you won't commit me? You promise you won't tell my parents where I am?" "I promise, Callie. Just tell me where you are. I'll bring the paperwork to you." "No," I said, injecting a note of paranoid panic into my voice. "Not you. I can't look at you. I'll meet Sterling. In public. At the coffee shop across from the firm. 1 p.m. I hung up before he could argue. At 1 p.m., I sat in the corner booth of the crowded coffee shop, wearing a shapeless sweater and dark sunglasses. I hunched my shoulders, physically manifesting the defeated, broken woman they expected. Sterling walked in at 1:05 p.m. He looked immaculate, practically vibrating with the impending victory of the billion-dollar buyout. He slid into the booth, across from me, and placed a manila folder on the table. "You're making the smart choice, Calliope," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "This is for the best. You were never built for this world." I didn't speak. I picked up the pen with trembling fingers. I looked at the IP transfer agreement. It relinquished all present and future rights to the Loom, transferring full ownership to Thorn Ascendant. It included a non-disparagement clause and a gag order. I signed my name. Sterling's eyes gleamed with raw, naked greed as he pulled the folder back. He reached into his jacket and slid a cashier's check across the table. $100,000. The price of my soul. "Have a good life, Calliope," he sneered, standing up. "Try not to spend it all on therapy." He walked out of the coffee shop, carrying the bomb I had planted directly into his own vault. I took the check. I stood up. My posture straightened. The trembling stopped. I took off the sunglasses and walked out into the cold afternoon air. The game of submission was over. Now, the countdown began. The acquisition of Thorn Ascendant by the tech conglomerate Apex Global was scheduled to close in exactly 14 days. It was the largest venture capital buyout of the fiscal year. The financial news networks were covering it incessantly. Sterling was giving interviews, positioning himself as the visionary genius who had revolutionized predictive market modeling. Vesper was frequently photographed by his side, consulting on the PR rollout. They looked intouchable. I spent those 14 days liquidating the cashier's check, funneling the money through a series of untraceable shell accounts Silas had set up for me in the Endress, Cayman Islands. I retained a shark of a corporate defense attorney in New York, a woman who hated Kalen's law firm with a burning passion, and paid her a massive retainer. I gave her strict instructions to wait for my signal. On the 14th day, the ink dried on the $1.2 billion acquisition. Apex Global officially integrated Thorn Ascendant servers into their primary Azeta trading platform. At 10 a.m. on a Tuesday, Sterling Thorn rang the opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange. He stood on the balcony, grinning for the cameras, raising his arms in triumph. At 10:04 a.m., Apex Global initiated the first live test of the Loom on their AM proprietary trading network. At 10:05 a.m., the Pandora malware woke up. I was sitting in the first-class lounge at SeaTac Airport, sipping a glass of sparkling water, watching the financial news on the massive plasma screen above the bar. "We have breaking news coming out of the tech sector," the anchor announced, pressing an earpiece against his ear. His face had gone completely pale. "It appears Apex Global's automated trading systems have malfunctioned. The system is initiating massive, unprompted short sells across their entire portfolio." I took a slow sip of water. The ticker at the bottom of the screen began to bleed red. Apex Global's stock price, which had been surging all morning, suddenly plummeted 5%, 10%, 20%. The algorithm at the center of the recent $1.2 billion acquisition from Thorne, Ascendant, appears to be the source of the catastrophic trades. The anchor continued, his voice tight with shock. Traders are reporting that the system has locked them out. The algorithm is currently liquidating assets at an extradited, unprecedented rate. The SEC has just halted trading on Apex Global. In the span of exactly 12 minutes, the Pandora malware had weaponized the Persistix Loom. Instead of predicting profitable market trends, it violently inverted them. It aggressively dumped blue-chip stocks at catastrophic losses while simultaneously purchasing massive volumes of worthless junk bonds. It was a digital kamikaze attack, and Sterling had sold it to them. My burner phone began to vibrate violently on the table. It was Sterling. He let it ring. It rang again. Kaylin. He let it ring. I pulled out my encrypted laptop and sent an email to my New York attorney. Attached to the email were the unredacted documents Silas had left me, the proof of Sterling's illegal bribes, the evidence of Kaylin's corporate espionage, and a meticulously detailed audit trail proving that Sterling and Kaylin had knowingly altered the source code of the Loom before the sale to sabotage Apex Global. It was a brilliant framing. I hadn't just destroyed the algorithm, I had planted false digital footprints within the Pandora malware that pointed directly to Sterling's personal IP address. I made it look like Sterling had intentionally built the poison pill to short Apex Global's stock and profit off the crash through offshore accounts. My attorney forwarded the entire dossier directly to the SEC, the FBI, and the legal counsel for Apex Global. By 2 p.m., the fallout was apocalyptic. Apex Global filed an emergency injunction, freezing the $1.2 billion buyout of funds before Sterling could access them. Thorne Ascendant's accounts were locked. The FBI raided Sterling's Seattle office, confiscating every hard drive and server in the building. I watched the live helicopter footage as Sterling Thorne was led out of his own building in handcuffs, surrounded by federal agents. The bespoke suit looked remarkably pathetic against the harsh glare of the camera lights. His arrogant smile was gone, replaced by the pale, terrified expression of a man who suddenly realized he was standing at the bottom of a very deep, very dark hole. At 4 p.m., Kaylin called me again. This time, I answered. Calliope, he gasped. He sounded like he was hyperventilating. Calliope, what? What did you do? The SEC is investigating my firm. They have emails, they have offshore routing numbers. The partners are throwing me to the wolves. They're going to disbar me. They're talking about federal prison. I don't know what you're talking about, Kaylin, I said, my voice perfectly calm, adopting the exact same gentle, condescending tone he used to use on me. I'm just an unstable coder. You have the signed paperwork proving I have no connection to the Loom. I signed all my rights away, remember? Silence stretched over the line as the horrible, inescapable truth slammed into him. I had signed the IP transfer. I had legally insulated myself from the algorithm literal days before it detonated. Because they had forced me to sign away my ownership, I was completely immune to the liability. I was just a disgruntled former employee who had quit. Sterling was the legal owner of the bomb. Sterling was the one who sold it. You set us up, Kaylin whispered, his voice trembling with sheer terror. You planted it. You knew. I understand you're under a lot of stress with the merger, Kaylin, I said. Smoothly, you sound very paranoid. Are you sure you shouldn't check yourself into a facility? I can recommend a good psychiatrist. I hear they have excellent affidavits. Calliope, please. Don't ever call this number again, I said. I ended the call. I removed the SIM card from the burner phone, snapped it in half, and dropped it into my empty water glass. There was only one loose end remaining. My family. I walked to my boarding gate. My flight to Zurich was boarding in 20-minutes. I used an encrypted VoIP app to make one final call. My mother answered on the second ring. Hello? Mom, I said. Calliope? Where have you been? Your father and I have been worried sick. Kaylin said you ran away, that you were having a severe episode. I'm at the airport, Mom. I'm leaving the country. Leaving? Calliope, you are not well. You need to come home right now. Kaylin, has the paperwork ready for the conservatorship? You are out of control. I know about the affidavits, Mom, I said. The words tasted metallic in my talic mouth, the final severing of a bloodline that had never nourished me. I know. You and Dad signed documents declaring me incompetent so Kaylin and Vesper could steal my settlement. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. The maternal concern vanished instantly, replaced by the cold, calculating curator. It was for your own protection, Calliope, my mother said defensively. You are incapable of managing massive wealth. You don't understand the real world. Vesper and Kaylin were going to make sure you were cared for in a nice facility. We were doing what was best for the family. The family, I repeated. You mean Vesper? Vesper has a future. Vesper has potential. She was going to build an empire. You were just going to sit in a dark room and stare at your computer. You owe us, Calliope. We put up with your strangeness for 29 years. We deserved a return on that investment. I closed my eyes. There it was. The ugly, unvarnished truth. I was an investment that failed to yield the correct aesthetic return. Well, I have some bad news about your other investments, I said softly. Turn on the financial news, Mom. Sterling Thorne has just been arrested for federal wire fraud and market manipulation. Apex Global is suing Thorne Ascendant into non-existence. Kaylin's law firm is currently being raided by the SEC. What? What does that have to do with us? Sterling's assets are frozen, which means the seed capital he promised Vesper for her PR firm doesn't exist. Furthermore, I forwarded a very interesting email thread to the federal prosecutors this afternoon, an email thread where Vesper explicitly coordinated with Sterling to illegally bypass the IP transfer protocols. They are going to subpoena her, Mom. They are going to drag her into a federal conspiracy case. Vesper isn't going to build an empire. She's going to need a very expensive defense attorney. You're lying, my mother gasped. You couldn't have done this. You're not capable. You spent your whole life telling me I was slow, Mom. You just never realized that while you were talking, I was analyzing the architecture of the room. You built your entire life around appearances. Let's see how beautiful you look when the FBI shows up at your door to ask about your golden child. Calliope, stop. If you do this, you are dead to us. Do you hear me? You will. Have no family. I never had a family, I said. I only had wardens, and my sentence is up. I hung up the phone. I boarded my flight. As the plane taxied down the runway, ascending into the gray Seattle clouds, I looked out the window at the city that had tried to consume me. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel evil. I just felt clean. The sensory overload that had plagued me my entire life was gone, replaced by the quiet, absolute hum of a closed equation. 6 months have passed since that rainy Tuesday. Sterling Thorne pleaded guilty to multiple counts of corporate fraud in a desperate attempt to avoid a 30-year sentence. He is currently serving 12 years in a federal penitentiary. The billion-dollar empire he inherited is a smoking crater of litigation. Kaylin was disbarred. The SEC investigation uncovered his deep involvement in Sterling's espionage, and to save himself from prison, he turned state's evidence. He works as a paralegal at a strip mall law firm in Idaho, drowning in civil lawsuits from Apex Global. Vesper didn't go to prison, but the scandal destroyed her pristine reputation. The PR clients fled. The luxury condo was repossessed when she couldn't make the condo payments. My parents had to liquidate my father's retirement accounts to pay her legal fees. They are socially radioactive in Seattle, living in a downsized townhouse, suffocating under the weight of the golden child who finally tarnished. And me? I live in a small, beautiful chalet in the Swiss Alps. The air is cold and crisp. The noise of the world is far away. Thanks to the untraceable accounts, Silas left me accounts fully funded by Sterling's offshore reserves before the Bass Day. FBI froze them. I have more money than I could ever spend. I don't build algorithms for venture capitalists anymore. I build predictive models for climate change nonprofits. I work entirely anonymously. I have a dog named Euclid. I drink Earl Grey tea. I am finally, wonderfully, spectacularly alone. They thought my autism made me a victim. They thought my inability to read a room meant I couldn't see the trap, but they forgot that while they were busy, looking at the surface, I was reading the code. I didn't just burn the house down, I salted the earth. And from the ashes, I finally built a life of my own.